Good morning. Today's daf is Masechet Bava Basra daf Chaf Ches. We begin today's daf by thanking all of our sponsors. We thank Daniel and Batsheva Pava from Hashmonaim, Israel, for sponsoring all of the shiurim and all of the drashas of the month of Tammuz in commemoration of their father, Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh Vegh of Philadelphia's Yahrzeit. As we mentioned, Reb Shlomo was a child survivor of Aushwitz and muvhak Reb Michel Ber Weismendel. He left over 90 descendants who are yireh Shamaim, his neshama have an aliya. We also thank Natan and Leah for sponsoring Daf Yomi this morning in memory of Tzvi, Sherizen's 10th yartzeit, Eliezer, Avraham, Tzvi, ben Pesachya, Leib, the neshama have an aliya, and the family have a neshama. We also thank Reb Michel for sponsoring Daf Yomi this morning in the dedication of the honor of the Tali's mother's first yartzeit, which is today. Brindle Miriam Bas Menachem Meir, the neshama should have an aliya, and the family should have a neshama. Amen. So we get to start a brand new parak this morning, parak Cheskes Sabatim. I don't have it, but we thank Alan and Sumayerwitz for sponsoring Daf Yomi this morning.
Yahrzeit for my dad.
In honor of the yartzeit of Alan's dad, the name is Shlomo ben Avraham HaKohen, and Shama should have an aliya, and the family should have a neshama. Thank you so much, Mario's family. We get to start a brand new parak this morning, parak Cheskes Sabatim. It's a long parak, it's an exciting parak, and it's actually a very logical parak. It's one of those parakim which is really, every parak in Shas is a beautiful parak. But Cheskes Sabatim is one of those parakim where a lot of the pieces fit together very well. In other words, as you learn through the Mishnayos, you come to understand the dinim of a chazaka. A lot of the Mishnayos fit together very well, and it's actually, I have very fond memories of learning parak Cheskes Sabatim in the past, and I look forward to learning it with you again over here. So let's just give a brief introduction to what's going on here in the parak. We use the term chazaka often throughout Shas, and it's important to distinguish between different types of chazakos. In Kiddushin and in previous Masechtas, we use the term chazaka predominantly in the sense of how a person acquires something, which basically means we find the terminology that something can be niknis, b'kesef, b'shtar, u'b'chazaka. What does that mean? Something can be acquired by using money, or by using a contract, or by doing some type of proprietary act on the field. It shows ownership. So you go into a field, and you go there, you start building, you build a door, or you start digging in the field, you start planting in the field. You do something to show ownership in the field. That is the way by which you will actually acquire the field. That's not what we're talking about at the beginning of this parak. It does come up later in the parak, but ultimately at the beginning of this parak we're talking about something else. It's also called a chazaka, but it has nothing to do with the method by which you are acquiring the field. Rather, the chazaka we're talking about now is called a chezkas raya, which basically just means that there's something that I have done that proves that I actually own the field. So no, it's not what I do to take ownership over the field. The way that I bought the field is irrelevant. I may have paid cash for it. I may have bought the field with a contract. I may have inherited the field. I may have received the field by way of a gift. But ultimately, what we're talking about over here is a person using a field in a way which would indicate that they actually own the field. So it's not the reason why you own the field, but it is an indication that you own the field. Now, just to get a couple of the terms in order. Throughout the parak, we're going to find the terminology which is marikama. Marikama literally translates as the original owner. When it comes to real estate, we all understand that the fact that you own a piece of real estate today might mean it's yours, but you're not the very first person to own that piece of real estate. It's real estate. It's been here for thousands of years. So marikama always refers to the original owner, not the original owner, but the most recently identified owner of that field. He's the marakam. Then you have the person who's making the chazaka, the person in question. And we also have the concept, the terminology called a me'arer. Me'arer is someone who comes to protest your ownership. So now, you have a person who's living in a field, and he's either living in a house or using a field, and however he bought that field, for all intents and purposes at this point in time, is irrelevant, but there is the marakama who comes by, he's the original owner, and he says, excuse me, you are in my field, please get out. So now, the response of the person who's in the field needs to include one of two options. Either he needs to produce a shtar, a document, with a title of the field, which has his name on it. And he says, listen, this field is actually mine. How do I know that it's mine? It's mine because there's a document which actually has my name on it. Now, the other option is we have to recognize that nowadays we have methods of storing documents for a very long time, and even if we lose the document, we still might have a digital version of that document. But you have to understand, in the times of Chazal, what's a person going to do with a document? You get a document and you own the field, you get the title, you roll it up and you put it away in a safe place, but where are you going to keep it? And you have a box which you keep locked, but recognizing that people's homes weren't very large, their homes were in many cases used for multiple different purposes, and it was very normal that after a number of years, the document or the title that you had that showed you owned the field had gotten lost. So there needs to be some other way that you could actually prove that the field belongs to you. And that's what we're talking about, which is a chazaka. Using the field for a specific amount of time where we would never be able to explain why you're there for such a long time, if not for the fact that you own it. Now the catch is that when I have a document that I own the field, the document says it's mine. I don't need to have any good reason why it's mine. The document actually states that it's mine, and that's good enough. However, when I'm using a chazaka, the chazaka has to have what's called a chazaka sheyesh imo taina, which means the mere fact that I claim that I've been there for a long time is not sufficient to give me ownership rights over the field. I have to actually be using that chazaka to validate a claim. That means that I need to come up with a legitimate explanation as to how I got there. So now a person says, sir, you're in my house. What are you doing here? And I say, well, I've been here for 10 years. He says, well, now it's time to get out. The halach is I have to get out. Because the fact that I'm there for 10 years doesn't mean that I own the field. But if I say I've been here for 3 years, and you know why I'm here? I'm here because I bought this house. So now I validated a claim. I made a legitimate claim of how I got there. I bought it. Or I was given the house as a gift. Or I inherited the house. Any one of those claims is a good claim. How do I validate it? I validate it by virtue of the fact that I say, if not for the fact that I legitimately bought this house, or inherited this house, or was given this home as a gift, there would be no way that I would be here for 3 years. So the combination of those two things is enough to support my ownership over that home. But just saying I bought it is obviously insufficient, or just saying I've been here is insufficient. And now we begin with the Mishnah in the beginning of Parak Cheskas Habatim. Cheskas Habatim, V'haboros, v'hashichin, v'hama'oros, v'hashovchos, v'hamerchatzos, ubeis habadim, ubeis hashlachim, v'havadim. What are all these things? Batim are homes. Boros, shichin, and ma'oros. We've come across this terminology a number of times, this phrase. Basically, it's all different styles of underground, little either pits or storage areas. V'hamerchatzos is a bathing house. Beis habadim is an olive press. Beis hashlachim is a field which has an irrigation system in it. We'll see in a minute why that's very important. V'avadim are servants. V'chol shehu oseh peros tadir. The common denominator in all of the above examples is that there's no specific season that it's used. It's used throughout the entire year. So again, a house is always lived in. Boros, shichin, and aros. These are little cisterns or pits that you keep things in. There's no reason why any season would be different than the other. A merachatz, a bathing house. Again, that should not be something which is seasonal. Beis Habadim, a place where, it is true that a Beis Habad, a olive press, does have a season where it's used more, which is closer to the harvest time. Nevertheless, it can be used at any point in time. You have olives, you want to put it into the press, you could always use it at any point in time. And then we have Beis Hashlachim. So again, this is a field that has an irrigation system in it. Therefore, it's not entirely dependent on the rainy season. Therefore, you could plant in it whenever you want because you have an artificial irrigation system, and therefore it's used throughout the entire year. Avadim, again, servants can be used the whole year. Therefore, all these things where the common denominator is, as the Mishnah says, V'cholshu osa peros tadir, it's constantly used to produce something, chezkasan, in order to make a chazaka, which means to create a chezkas raya, to create a proof that it actually belongs to you. You have to have shalosh shanim miyom liyom. You have to have 3 years of consecutive ownership or activity as an owner on this field. So now, does this mean that 365 days of the year you have to actually be there inside this house or in this field? You can never leave and go on vacation. Can't go away for Shabbos? The answer is no. It just means there can never be a period of time when the original owner, the Marikama, could come back and say, listen, I got news that you were squatting in my house, and I came back and I found the house was empty. You can't have a period of time when that happens. Can you go away for a day? Anything which is normal, you can do. But if you're going to say, I've been here for 3 years, and the original owner says, you have not been here for 3 years. I came back to the field or to the home to check on it, and I found it was unoccupied. So that means you have disturbed or you have disrupted your 3-year period, and your 3-year period is not going to work. You won't be able to validate that you had the field or any of these above items for that period of time. You have to be there for the consecutive 3 years. Sedei Abal, so you have a field which relies entirely on rainwater. Halacha is cheskasa shalosh shanim. You still have to have 3 years of an establishment of ownership or using this property. However, the difference is ve'enan miyom liyom. It does not have to be consecutive 3 years. So now, what do you have to have? I'm going to explain the Mishnah the way that Rashi learns it, which is the next 2 opinions, Rabbi Shlomo and Rabbi Akiva, are simply explaining the above line. What does that mean? If you have a field which relies entirely on rainwater, and therefore it only produces during specific seasons, then you don't have to have a full 3-year chazaka. You have to have a 3-year chazaka, but not consecutive. What does that mean? The truth is, I'm using the term consecutive. It's not really the most precise language to use, because we're going to find out later on in the Gemara that there's a machlokes. Reb Huna says it has to be consecutive, but others say not that way. So let's not use consecutive anymore. It means it doesn't have to be 3 full years. It's 3 years, but not 3 full years. So how much time does it have to be? Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Gimel Chadashim Barishona, Gimel Ba'achrona, V'shneimas Chodesh Be'emtza, Harei Yud Ches Chodesh. According to Rabbi Shmuel, you have to have a total of 18 months. How does that work out? As long as you occupy the field for 3 months before Rosh Hashanah, and then the entire year from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and then 3 months after Rosh Hashanah. So you have Tammuz of Elul, where you occupy the field, and then you have the entire year. Then it comes to Elul, and then you have Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev. So basically, according to Rabbi Shmuel, you have 18 months where you are occupying that field, and that's enough. What's the reason for that? The reason for that is because that's the time when people use the field. So in other words, the 3 months before Rosh Hashanah, people might start planting then. And then you have the whole year, and then you have 3 months at the end where people are actually going to be harvesting. Now, Rabbi Akiva disagrees, and he says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Chodesh Parishona, just 1 month in the first year, Chodesh Ba'achrona, just 1 month in the last year, Yud Beis Chodesh Be'emtza, and 12 months in the middle, Harei Yud Daled Chodesh, you have to have a sum total of 14 months. Now, why the Mishnah has to do the math for us is a good question. Tosfos asks the question, why couldn't it just say 3 months, then 12 months, and 3 months, and then we will take out our calculators. If we could have taken our calculators yesterday to figure out the Gemara yesterday, we certainly can add 12 plus 3 plus 3, and we would figure that one out. It's a good question, but that ultimately addresses the point that we made before about the consecutive nature. Amar Rabbi Shlomo. Rabbi Shlomo adds on to this. When is it said that you have to have 3 months, and then 12 months, then 3 months? That's only b'stei halavan, in white fields. White fields are referred to as white fields because they have no trees, and therefore the sun dries them out. Generally, those are going to be fields that have grain in it. It's just a grain field, not growing any trees, so therefore, in those fields, it's going to have a pretty white look to it. Aval b'stei ilan, when you have a field which is not a white field, it's full of greenery because it has trees, it has leaves, it has fruits. In such a case, he says, in massive Kiddush, you don't have to have 3 years altogether. All you need to have is 3 proprietary actions that take place, which is kanasas tevuaso. This person's there, he brings in the tevuah. Now, we have to understand that tevuah cannot mean grain. Although tevuah normally means grain, we just got finished saying that this is not a stei alava. This is a field full of trees. Now, grain doesn't grow on trees. So therefore, tevuah is basically just a terminology being used to describe what's growing. In this case, we're going to define tevuah as grapes. He brings in the tevuah, so he's in someone else's field, and he's bringing in tevuah. Why would that be? The only reason that would be is because he bought it, or now it belongs to him. So he brings in the grapes, and then umasak es zeisav, he goes to the other side of the field that has olive trees, he brings in the olives, kanas es ketzo, he brings in the figs, harei elu gimel shana. Even though it's not 3 calendar years, but it's 3 specific different actions that happen in a row, which indicate that he is taking ownership of the field. Nobody comes by and says, hey, what are you doing? Why are you taking in all the grapes? Those don't belong to you. No one comes by and says, sir, excuse me, why are you bringing in all the olives? And hey, how come you're just driving away a truckload full of figs? You know why no one came and said that to him? The answer is because he's the owner of the field. So if he's able to successfully accomplish those 3 tasks without anybody coming by and making what's called a macha, without protesting against him, he then has an indication that he must own the field, and that would validate his claim that he bought it, or that he inherited it, or that he received it as a gift. Okay, so basically this Mishnah described to us 2 different scenarios. One is something in a field or a home or any specific item which is used throughout the whole year. If you want to claim that item is yours and not produce the bill of sale or the title of that specific field, then you want to rely on chazaka. You have to come with a valid claim and claim that you've been there for 3 years straight, 3 full years. If it's a field which does not have year-round use, just has seasonal use, then basically what we're pointing out is you have to be there during that season. As long as you're there during that season for 3 years, it's going to work. Now the Gemara asks a fundamental question. I just wanted to point out, there's a line in Rashi here which I think is just important to read together. If you go in the Rashi, Sdei Habal, it's 3 lines before Rashi Dibur Amaskar B'Kiva Omer. And Rashi says something which is just important to help us understand what happens in this parak. He says, She'ein l'cha adam haro'a es chavero, shezorea es sadeu, lechal peri ha'asui l'shana v'shosek. This is a very important line, which, again, this is not a way to buy a field, but there is an establishment of norms. And that means there's no normal person who just simply and silently stands by and watches someone else take over their field and says nothing. Now, whether or not they'll go into the field and physically remove them is a different story. but that they would say absolutely nothing, and that means they won't stand outside yelling, they won't call up a friend and say, I got this problem, I'm not sure what to do. Someone's in my field. In other words, the fact that someone is perfectly silent when someone else is acting like an owner over his property is an indication that it's not his property. Because no normal person just silently stands by when someone else moves into their house and starts acting as an owner of the field. Now, the fact that a person did do that for 3 seasons in a row or 3 years in a row is an indication that they are normal. But the reason why they're not making a problem is because the person actually owns the next person actually owns it. Next, Rabbi Yochanan. Yochanan, now he wants to explain to us, where did we get this concept of 3 years? Who says you have to have 3 years? Rabbi Yochanan, Shamati mihalchi Usha. I heard from those people who go to Usha. Who are these people? So we're going to see at the end of today's daf, this refers to Rabbi Yishmael. Rashi explains to us that during different periods of time, the Sanhedrin, the high courts, were relocated. And one of the places the Sanhedrin was relocated to was a place called Usha. Okay, so I heard from the Halchi Usha, Shayu Omrim, Minayin Lechazaka Gimel Shanim. How do I know that a chazaka, an establishment of ownership, as proof that they own a particular field or a piece of property is Gimel Shanim, is 3 years? Mishar Hamud. We learned this from Shar Hamud. So just a very quick reminder, what is a Shar Hamud? If a person owns an ox, now the first 3 times that the ox causes damage, we consider it to be out of character for this ox, and therefore the owner is only responsible to pay chatzi nezek, half the damage. After an animal establishes a pattern of damaging 3 times, we say, sir, Mr. Owner of this animal, you have to recognize your animal's wild, your animal's going to cause damage, you have the responsibility to increase your level of guardianship over this animal to make sure it doesn't cause further damage. Now, how many times does it take before we start charging him for the full amount of the damage? 3 times. So says the Gemara, we learned the concept of 3 from Shar Hamud. Ma Shar Hamud kivun shnagach givun agichos. Just like when it comes to an ox, once it gores 3 times, nafak le michezkas tam v'kam le michezkas muad, it leaves the category of being a tame animal and now assumes the category, the standard or the status of being a wild animal. Once a person uses a field for 3 years, the field leaves the original owner's possession, and is now relocated or repossessed by the new owner. Gemara says, okay, if you're telling me that the way that we establish ownership over a field is exactly the same as we establish an animal's behavior patterns, when it comes to a Shar Hamud, when is the owner obligated to pay a higher amount for the damage, to pay for full damage? That's only when it damages the 4th time. It should take until the 4th year for a person to be able to establish ownership. Gemara says, hold on. How do you compare these 2 cases? Once it gores 3 times, havi muad, top of chavches samad beis. Okay, so once it gores 3 times, it becomes a muad. Now, at this time, right now, it gores 3 times. What do you want to happen? Well, nothing. It hasn't gored again. So the status is, you're right, at this point, its status is a muad. You don't have to pay like an extra tax for being a muad. There's no fee for being a muad. If in the category of being a muad, it damages again, yes, you'll have to pay. So the idach kilo nagach, my l'shalim, there's nothing to pay for unless it gores again. However, hacha, in our case, we want to leave it as the status quo. Kivan da'achla tlas shni, once a person already owns the field or has been using the field for 3 years, you leave the field in his possession, nothing else has to happen. So in other words, the cases are comparable in the fact that it takes 3 times to establish a certain fact pattern, But that fact pattern is established, but it's going to manifest itself different in different cases. When it comes to a shar, it has to damage again to actually show that it's acting as a wild animal. They don't have to pay again. However, in this case, once a person establishes that they own the field, and they're allowed to live there. The Gemara says, hold on a second. Elamiyata. If you're telling me that once a person does something for 3 years or 3 times as a pattern, Elamiyata chazaka she'ein imotayna tavi chazak. We mentioned at the beginning of this year that a chazaka only works if it's accompanied by a valid claim of how you got there. But if you're telling me that all it needs is 3 times for us to establish this fact, why do I actually need to have a claim of how I got there? Now, this is a very strange question, because what are you doing here? Very nice, you have a pattern of being here, but just can you explain what you're doing here? A simple, basic explanation. You move into someone's house and say, I've been here for 10 years. Thank you. Why are you? What inspired you to move into this house? I'm here for 10 years. Did you ever buy the house? Oh, I'm here for 10 years. What does the Gemara's Hava mean? How did you get it? So Tosfos explains, this is very important to understand. Tosfos understands that the chazaka really is not so much that you're there, but the chazaka is the fact that nobody came to complain for 3 years in a row is an indication that they recognize that you're now the new owner, and they must have forgiven you or allowed you to move into the house, and now they've gifted the field to you. That's the Havamin. Of course, that's not actually the Maskana, but at least that's the Havamin, it's the thought process in the question. So, Alama Tnan, why do we learn in the Mishnah, Kal Chazaka She'eni Matainan Eina Chazaka? Why does it say that if there's no claim, it's not going to work? Gemara says, Taimamai. In other words, let's try to understand this. How does this work? The Amrinan, why does the chazaka work? The Amrinan, we say, Dilma Kedika Amar Hashta. Dilma Kedika Amar. Maybe it's like he's saying, Hashta Iyu Lotayim Anan Litan Le. So now the Gemara explains this with greater detail. Now the Gemara adds an element of logic to this chazaka. In other words, you have, let's just give names over here. Ruvain is the Marakama, he's the first owner of the field. Shimon's the guy who's in the field or the house now. Now Ruvain comes to Shimon and says, Sir, you stole my house. What are you doing here? So his claim is, Shimon, you're a thief. Shimon responds and says, I'm no thief. I bought the house from you. I paid you for the house. We have nothing that actually could validate one claim or the other. There's no document. We have no way to know who's right or who's wrong. So now we add the element to the fact that Shimon's been here for 3 years. And we say, listen, if he's been here for 3 years, he's probably right when he claims that he bought the house. Now, if the guy himself can't even come up with a legitimate reason as to why he's in the house, are we supposed to fabricate a claim for him and say, oh, you must have bought it? Gemara says, no, we'd never do that. So therefore, although when it comes to a shar muad, the fact that it had the actions of 3 times is enough, but that's not going to be enough to establish ownership of a property. Okay, the Gemara goes on. Maskif law, Rav Avira. Rav Avira goes ahead and says, continuing along this logic, that the rules for the ownership of the field are going to be dictated by Shara Muad, let's start comparing this to Shara Muad. Ela me'ata, if it's true that we're learning all this from Shara Muad, macha shlo b'fanav lo tavi macha. If you make a claim, or if you protest a person's occupancy of your field, when you're not in front of that person, it should not work. Why? Just like a Shara Muad. Why ma Shara Muad b'fanav v'inan? Just like when it comes to Shara Muad. You can't just go to a beis din and say, oh, by the way, I want to let you know, Ruvain's ox has been goring out of control. It's 3 times that it went ahead and gored, and therefore it's a Shara Muad. No, you have to actually call the owner to beis din, and you have to say, sir, your ox gored. It caused a lot of damage. You have to do that 3 times in front of the owner. Afachanami. In our case also, b'fanav v'inan, we should say you have to actually make the protest in front of the owner. The Gemara says no. Hasam v'huad b'v'alav ksiv. When it comes, you're right that, in other words, you're right that they're very similar, but there's separate reasons why, when it comes to a shar, to the owner of an ox, why the owner needs to be present when the person's going to claim your ox went ahead and gored. Why? Because what happens if I go to Beis Din and I say, listen, Beis Din, Reuven's ox gored my ox and killed it. Now, if Reuven is not there, he has no ability to defend himself. He has no way to say, maybe it wasn't mine, maybe it was your ox that gored, maybe something else happened. So therefore, it's just not valid. You have to have the owner over there. You're essentially using that time as a warning period to say to the owner, Mr. Owner, Reuven, your ox is goring. Get control over it. But if he's not there, he can't refute the claims, and he can't either be warned to take better care of his animal. So therefore we understand, for huad b'va'alav is a necessity, he has to be there. However, in our case, hacha, chavra islay, v'chavrach dechavra, chavra islay. V'chavrach, chavrach, chavra islay, v'chavra dechavra, chavra islay. Exactly. This is a very famous line in Shas, which basically means your friend has a friend, and your friend also has a friend, and his friend also has a friend. Which basically means, don't tell anybody a secret. Why? Because everyone likes to talk, everyone likes to gossip. Once you tell one person a piece of information, you have to assume that in 5 minutes the whole world's going to know about this. And that's really, it's actually not just like a quip that's used, it's actually used clearly in this Gemara as a halacha, which means that if I go ahead and I say to somebody, hey, listen, Reuven's living in my house. I don't know what the guy's doing there. It's my house. I own it. I went on vacation, came home, found this guy living in my house. He doesn't belong there. I got to find a way to get him out. Guess what? If you tell your friend that, he's going to turn around and say to the guy behind him in shul, what happened? This guy went on vacation. He came home, found someone else living in his house. And then he turns around, and all these people start telling everybody, before you know it, the guy who's living in the house hears the buzz. Hey, I heard you're living in this guy's house without permission. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. So the bottom line is, when it comes to a machat, to protest someone who is living in someone else's house or occupying someone's field, the point is not to warn him. The point is that the people should know, and he should know, that he should hold on to his star. The guy, if you really bought the house, he hears a buzz that he's a thief, that he's a squatter, he knows, I better hold on to this document. So therefore, the macha, the protest can be made even when he's not there. L'meir da'amar richek nigichosav chayiv kirv nigichosav lo kol shekain achla plus peri b'chada yoma going to ein lavi chazaka. So again, getting back into our discussion of Shar Hamud, in Maseches Bava Kamar there's a machlokus, but ultimately there's a machlokus between, I think it's Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Is it? Yes. Rabbi Yehuda says, in order for an animal to be considered a Shar Hamud, it has to gore 3 different times on 3 different days. Can't just be one bad day. Now the animal woke up, was having a bad day, wasn't feeling so well, and just started acting crazy. It has to be 3 different days. However, Rabbi Meir disagrees. Rabbi Meir says an animal gores once in the morning, once in the afternoon, then again in the late afternoon that same day. An animal has now established itself as a Shar Hamud. It's a wild animal. If it's going to go and gore and cause damage again, it's going to have to pay nezek shaliv. So the Gemara says, if that's true, that when it comes to Shar Hamud, all of it can happen in one day. If that's the case, achla tlasa peri b'chadiyoma, if you're going to eat 3 fruits in one day, it's going to eina lavi chazaka. Why does the Gemara say a fig? Rashi explains that figs don't all ripen at the same time. You can have a fig which is ripe in the morning, and then another fig on the same tree can become ripe in the afternoon. So if you're going to take the ripe fig in the morning, and the ripe fig in early afternoon, and a ripe fig in later afternoon, so you have 3 different figs that you essentially harvested from the field, that should be enough to establish ownership of the field. Where it says, no, Dumei de Shar Hamud. It has to be similar to Shar Hamud, which is, Be'idna de Islay Hanagicha Lasala Hanagicha. Each of the goring periods is isolated on its own. At the time that it is engaging in the first fight, the second fight doesn't exist yet. So therefore, the figs have to be existing at different times. It can't just be that you have 3 figs on the tree, and the morning one became ripe, in the early afternoon the second one became ripe, in the later afternoon the last one became ripe. They all were there existing at the same time, and therefore that's not enough. You have to make sure that fruit's not there. The Gemara says, okay, what if you ate 3 fruits on 3 days? You go in slaf. I don't know exactly how to define slaf, but basically Rashi writes, and in other places as well, that slaf is the kind of tree where there's multiple edible items on the same tree. Yes, some fruit, even perhaps the bark or the leaves are edible. So therefore you could have on one day, one of them is existent, but the other day, the next one. So you can have 3 days in a row, 3 different types of fruits that come off of it. So lahave chazaka, the Gemara says no. Hasam pera mia isa. Even though they're not ready, but they're there at some early, premature stage, and therefore, again, that's not compared to a sharmud, because although it's not really ripe, it does exist. However, umigmar hudikagamir va'azil, it just takes time until it's ready. Next, achlat plasa peri betlasin yomi. If you eat 3 fruits in 30 days, could go on aspasta. We had aspasta before in this Pesachya. Aspasta is like animal fodder, maybe hay or something, which grows very quickly. So if you eat that in 30 days, in other words, you don't allow it to get fully ripe. You plant it, a week later it starts to grow, you uproot the whole thing and you eat it, and then you do that 3 times. That if you do that 3 times within 30 days, that should be your full chazaka. Your full 3 years should be done right then and there. Gemara says, hey chidami. What would be the case? So again, achla plasa peri betlasin yom kigon aspasta lave chazaka. Hey chidami, what's the case? The kadiach va'achel, he's quickly just cutting it down and eating it. Hasam mishama tu de kashamet. That's not called eating. That's just like snapping. You're quickly just taking something off. That's not full ownership. That doesn't really show that you're actually an owner. The kashamet v'achel. Next, the Gemara says, how about achat plasa peri betlasa yarchi? Okay, you couldn't find a way to eat so much in 1 month. So how about if a person eats tlasa peri, 3 different fruits, betlasa yarchi, in 3 months? Kigon aspasta, lavi chazaka. Now, aspasta, this animal fodder grows pretty quickly. So you plant it on day 1. By day 30, it's ready to be harvested. So if you do that 3 times, you should be able to establish a chazaka of owning this field for what would be the equivalent of 3 years in simply 3 months. The Gemara says, guess what? Man halchei usha. Who are these halchei usha that we're talking about? Rabbi Yishmael. It's Rabbi Yishmael from our Mishnah. Now, remember what Rabbi Yishmael told us in our Mishnah? Rabbi Yishmael hachanami. You're right. Indeed, doing this action for 3 months in a row would be good. Jitnan, for it says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, when did we say that you have to actually span your period of time from really, when the Mishnah said it was going to be 18 months, that's only Bistei Lavan, by a white field. A white field is a grain field, which takes a very long time. Aval Bistei Ilan, when it comes to a field that has trees in it, Kanas es Tvuaso, he simply brings in the grapes, as we described. Tvuaso in this case means grapes. Masak es Zeisav, and he goes ahead and he brings in his olives. V'kines es Kitzo, he brings in his figs. Harei Elu Gimel Shanim. That would be sufficient for Rabbi Yishmael. So you're right. Rabbi Yishmael says if you could just simply go into the field, you work with the grapevines, you work with the olive trees, you work with the fig trees, and you bring that all in. You've done everything you have to do, and you have your chazaka. Now you've properly established ownership over the field, and that's good. So therefore, you're right. Halchi usha that say that the chazaka is compared to or learned from shara muad, that would be enough. If you have aspasta growing in this field and you plant it, 30 days later you bring it in, you plant it again, 30 days later you bring it in, and then you plant it one more time and 30 days later you bring it in. According to Rabbi Yishmael, you can establish a chazaka on this field as long as you come by with a valid claim of how you got the field. You claim you bought it, you were gifted it, or you inherited it, or something else like that. That would be sufficient, and that would be enough. Now the Gemara asks, you know what? Let's stop over here for today because it goes on to a whole other Gemara. It happens to be fascinating that the Gemara is about to quote a pasuk from Yirmiyah as he was predicting the Chorban. It's Shiva Asar B'Tammuz today, but we'll save it for tomorrow. Okay, have a wonderful day.